December 16, 1944. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. The fog is so thick you can taste it. It clings to the pine trees like a wet, freezing blanket, muffling the sound of thousands of men moving through the snow. Corporal Hans Mueller shivers, but not just from the cold. His stomach is a tight, cramping knot against his spine. He hasn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. In his pocket, there is a single rock-hard crust of Kommissbrot, the dark, sawdust-filled bread that the Wehrmacht is now issuing to its soldiers. It is frozen solid. He sucks on a piece of ice just to trick his stomach into thinking it's full. Around him, the ghost of the German army is gathering for one last, desperate scream. These are not the polished, arrogant stormtroopers of 1940. Look at them. Their uniforms are mismatched. Some wear white winter ponchos made from bedsheets. Others are shivering in thin wool tunics meant for summer. Their eyes are hollow, sunken deep into their skulls. They look more like walking corpses than conquerors. But there is a strange, frantic energy in the air tonight. The officers have promised them something. "The Americans are weak," the Oberleutnant whispered during the briefing, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "They are fat and lazy. We will break their line, cross the Meuse River, and take Antwerp. But more importantly," he paused, looking at his starving men, "we will take their supplies. They have fuel, they have cigarettes, they have meat." Hans grips his Kar 98 rifle tighter. This is the secret reality of Operation Whacked 'em Rhine, Watch on the Rhine. The German High Command calls it a strategic counter-offensive. But for men like Hans, it is essentially an armed robbery. The Tiger II tanks idling behind the tree line are terrifying beasts, but they are thirsty. They have enough fuel for maybe 100 kilometers. If they don't capture American fuel depots within 48 hours, the tanks become the world's heaviest paperweights. The plan relies on a miracle. It relies on the weather grounding the American Air Force. And it relies on the belief that the American soldier, once punched in the nose, will run away and leave his dinner behind. 05:30 a.m. The silence of the forest is shattered. 2,000 German artillery guns open fire simultaneously. The ground jumps. The sky behind Hans lights up in a strobe light flicker of orange and red. The roar is physical, it vibrates in his teeth. "Forward," the order comes down the line. "For Germany, for food." Hans rises from his foxhole. He runs into the darkness, his boots crunching on the snow. He isn't thinking about the geopolitical strategy. He isn't thinking about the master race. He is thinking about a rumor he heard from a prisoner last week. The prisoner said the Americans have coffee, real coffee, not the burnt acorn sludge the Germans drink. Hans runs toward the muzzle flashes of the American lines. He is running for his life, but mostly he is running for his breakfast. He has no idea that what he is about to find in the American trenches will hurt him more than any bullet ever could. He is running for his life, but mostly he is running for his breakfast. He has no idea that what he is about to find in the American trenches will hurt him more than any bullet ever could. 08:00 a.m. Inside the captured American forward operating base, the firefight was brief. The Americans, surprised and overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers, retreated back toward the town of Saint-Vith. They left in a hurry. Hans kicks open the door to a log-covered dugout. He expects to find a grim, rat-infested hole like the ones he has slept in for the last 2 years on the Eastern Front. Instead, he is hit by a wall of warmth. A stove is burning in the corner, a real cast iron stove glowing with heat. There is no smell of unwashed bodies or rotting damp. Instead, the air smells of tobacco and something else, something rich and earthy, coffee. Hans steps inside, his rifle lowered. His squad mates push in behind him, their eyes wide. They look like feral animals entering a palace. On a rough wooden table, a breakfast has been interrupted. There are tin cups still steaming. Hans reaches out with a shaking, gloved hand and picks up a pack of cigarettes lying casually next to a map. Lucky strikes. In Germany, a pack like this would cost a week's wages on the black market. Here it was just left behind, forgotten. Look at this, a private named Weber whispers. He is holding a loaf of bread. But it isn't the black, sour rye bread they are used to. It is pure white, soft, spongy. To the German soldiers, white bread is a luxury reserved for the sick or the very rich. The Americans apparently eat it every Tuesday. Weber tears a chunk off and shoves it into his mouth, chewing frantically. Butter, he mumbles, crumbs falling onto his dirty tunic. It tastes like real butter. Hans moves deeper into the dugout. He finds boxes stacked against the wall. They aren't ammunition crates. They are cardboard boxes stamped with logos. Hershey's, Coca-Cola. He pulls out a tin can. It's heavy. The label says spiced ham, meat, real, preserved meat, not horse, not mystery filler. A strange feeling begins to settle in Hans's chest. It isn't triumph. It is confusion. His officers told him the Americans were soft. They said the American supply lines were overextended, that U-boats were sinking their ships, that the people back in New York were starving to support the war. But looking around this dugout, Hans sees no sign of shortage. He sees excess. He sees a cigarette butt thrown on the floor that was only half smoked. Who is rich enough to throw away half a cigarette? Corporal, someone shouts from the back of the bunker. You have to see this. Hans turns. One of the younger soldiers is standing over a large, open mail sack. He isn't holding a weapon. He is holding a box wrapped in brown paper that has been torn open. The soldier's face is pale, as if he has seen a ghost. Hans walks over. He looks down into the box. And that is when the reality of the war shifts beneath his feet. It isn't a weapon. It isn't a map. It is something that should not exist on a battlefield. Hans walks over. He looks down into the box. And that is when the reality of the war shifts beneath his feet. It isn't a weapon. It isn't a map. It is something that should not exist on a battlefield. It is wrapped carefully in layers of wax paper. Hans reaches down, his woolen glove clumsy against the delicate wrapping. He peels back the layers. The smell hits him first. It is a thick, sweet wave of sugar, cocoa, and vanilla. It is a smell that has not existed in Germany for 3 years. Lying inside the cardboard box, nestled in crumpled American newspaper, is a chocolate cake. It isn't a military-issue ration bar. It isn't a dried fruit brick meant to last for a decade. It is a dense, moist, homemade cake covered in thick fudge frosting. A slice has already been cut from it, likely by the American private just before the mortars started falling this morning. Hans stares at it. The sheer absurdity of it makes him dizzy. Outside, the temperature is 10 degrees below zero. Men are freezing to death in snowbanks. Tanks are burning. The world is reduced to ice, mud, and high explosives. And here sits a fresh pastry. He sees a small card taped to the inside flap of the box. He picks it up. The handwriting is loopy and feminine. Written in English, it says, "For my dearest Danny, happy 22nd birthday. Love, Mom, Boston, Mass." He looks at the postmark on the torn brown paper wrapper. December 4, 1944. Hans does the math in his head, his mind reeling. 12 days. 12 days ago, a mother in Boston baked this cake in a warm kitchen. She wrapped it up and took it to a post office. In those 12 days, this cake traveled 3,000 miles across an ocean infested with German U-boats. It was offloaded at a massive port in France, perhaps Cherbourg or Antwerp, ports the Allies rebuilt in weeks after the Germans destroyed them. It was loaded onto a truck, one of the thousands of Red Ball Express trucks that run 24 hours a day burning gasoline that Germany desperately needs. It was driven across France through Belgium and delivered right to the front line of the greatest battle of the year. It arrived still fresh. The frosting isn't even cracked. Hans thinks about his own supply lines. He thinks about the letter he wrote to his wife in Hamburg 3 months ago. She still hasn't received it. He thinks about the horse-drawn carts that are currently trying to bring artillery shells through the mud behind the German lines because they don't have enough trucks. The silence in the dugout is suffocating. The other soldiers are staring at the cake like it is an unexploded bomb. "Is that real?" the young soldier whispers. Hans doesn't answer. He takes off his dirty glove. He reaches down and breaks off a small piece of the cake where it had been cut. The crumb is soft, almost oily with richness. He puts it in his mouth. The taste is explosive. It is so sweet, so rich with butter and real chocolate that it almost hurts his teeth. His salivary glands sting. It is the taste of childhood before the war, before the rationing, before the hunger. But as the sugar dissolves on his tongue, a cold, sickening dread washes over him. This cake is a weapon. It is a devastating psychological demonstration of power. If the Americans can ship a birthday cake across an ocean to a single soldier on the front lines in 12 days, what else can they do? If they have enough ships and trucks and fuel to prioritize pastries, it means they have already shipped every gun, every tank, and every bullet they could possibly need. It means the Allied supply chain is not strained. It is overflowing. Hans looks at Weber, who is still holding the white bread. Weber isn't eating anymore. He is looking at the cake, and the realization is dawning on his face too. The manic energy of the morning assault is gone, replaced by a hollow terror. They haven't just broken into a pantry, they have glimpsed the infinite industrial machine of their enemy. They are fighting a country that treats a global war like a minor shipping inconvenience. Hans swallows the sweet cake. It tastes like ashes. Hans swallows the sweet cake. It tastes like ashes. The same moment, deep in the subconscious of the German army. Hans is not the first German soldier to feel this specific, crushing weight in his chest. As he stares at the chocolate frosting in the freezing Belgian winter, he remembers a story told by his platoon sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Kruger who had served in the Afrika Korps years earlier. Kruger had lost an eye in Tunisia, but it was the memory of a captured jeep that haunted him most. Hans remembers sitting around a campfire in 1943, listening to Kruger whisper about the heat of the North African desert. "It was 120 degrees," Kruger had said. "Our water tanks were empty. We were drinking radiator fluid strained through bread just to stay alive. We had no fuel. We had no medicine. We were rotting alive in that sand." Kruger told them about the day they ambushed a British supply column that was driving American vehicles. They expected to find ammunition or maybe gasoline. Instead, they found the mail. Kruger described tearing open a package addressed to a U.S. corporal. Inside, they found a chocolate cake just like this one packed in a tin to protect it from the heat, but it wasn't just the cake, it was what they found next to it. "Fresh socks," Kruger had said, shaking his head in disbelief. "And new razors. And chewing gum." Kruger had looked at the young recruits with his one good eye and said the words that Hans was now hearing in his own head. "We looked at that cake and we knew the war was over. You cannot beat an enemy who has a supply line that stretches across the world just to deliver a dessert. We were fighting for survival and they were fighting with all the comforts of home." Back in the Ardennes bunker, the memory slams into Hans with the force of a physical blow. It is happening again. The landscape has changed from the burning sands of Africa to the frozen forests of Belgium, but the enemy is exactly the same. The Americans are not just soldiers, they are the tip of an industrial spear that is endless. Hans looks at the Boston postmark again. He realizes that while the German propaganda machine screams about wonder weapons like the V-2 rocket or the jet fighters that are supposed to save them, the Americans have a weapon far more terrifying. Their weapon is the logistics of plenty. The Americans don't need a wonder weapon. They have the Liberty ship, they have the 2.5-ton truck, they have the C-47 transport plane, they have a system that treats the Atlantic Ocean like a highway. Hans looks at his squad. They are gorging themselves on the white bread and the spiced ham. They are laughing, drunk on the sudden influx of calories. They are shoving cigarettes into their pockets. They think this is a victory. They think they have looted a prize, but Hans sees it for what it is. This bunker isn't a prize, it's a tombstone. Eat up, Hans says quietly, his voice hollow. Eat it all. Why, Corporal? Weber asks, his mouth full of cake. We should save some for later, for the march to Antwerp. Hans shakes his head. He walks to the door of the dugout and looks out into the snow. The sound of heavy engines is drifting through the trees, not the grinding rattle of German panzers, but the deep, throaty roar of American Shermans regrouping for a counter-attack. There won't be a march to Antwerp, Hans says, almost to himself. There is no later. He knows now that the tanks waiting in the tree line behind them will never get their fuel. He knows the offensive will stall within days, not because of American bravery, but because the Americans have more gas in their cigarette lighters than the Germans have in their tanks. He turns back to the men. Enjoy the cake, he says. It's the last victory we will ever have. He turns back to the men. Enjoy the cake, he says. It's the last victory we will ever have. December 24, 1944, the retreat, Christmas Eve, but there are no carols singing in the Ardennes. There is only the sound of the wind howling through the pine trees and the distant, thunderous drone of aircraft engines. The miracle of the weather has ended. The skies have cleared. The American Air Force is back. Corporal Hans Müller is walking. He is walking east, back toward Germany, back toward the cage that is slowly closing around his country. He is not marching, he is stumbling. He passes a King Tiger tank parked on the side of the logging road. It is a magnificent machine, 68 tons of sloped armor and high-velocity death. It is the most feared tank in the world, and it is completely useless. The crew is abandoning it, not because it was hit, not because the tracks broke, but because the fuel gauges are reading empty. The massive Maybach engine is cold. The captured American fuel they were promised never materialized. The Americans burned their own depots rather than let the Germans have them. Hans looks at the abandoned metal monster. It is a perfect metaphor for the Third Reich, terrifying on the outside but empty on the inside. He reaches into his pocket. His fingers brush against a few crumbs wrapped in wax paper, the last remnants of the chocolate cake. He remembers the taste. It was sweet, yes. But now, in the bitter cold of the retreat, he understands what that sweetness really meant. The German soldier was fighting on adrenaline and fear. He was fighting for a regime that demanded he die for a lie. He was told he was a Superman, yet he was scavenging for crusts of bread. The American soldier was fighting with the backing of a civilization that could move mountains. The Americans didn't just send men to kill, they sent a system to crush. They sent an economy that could wrap love in brown paper and deliver it to a foxhole. Hans realizes now that the battle wasn't decided when the artillery started firing on December 16th. It wasn't decided when the tanks ran out of gas today. It was decided weeks ago in a warm kitchen in Boston when a mother mixed flour and sugar, confident that her country could deliver it safely to her son. That confidence was the true superpower. Hans takes the last crumb of the cake and lets it fall into the snow. It disappears instantly into the white drift. He adjusts his rifle, pulls his collar up against the wind, and keeps walking into the dark. He knows the truth now. The bullet might kill him tomorrow or the day after, but the war was over the moment he saw the frosting.